Welcome back, you all, to CHD 204 Methods and Materials for Teaching Young Children. This week, we're going to be talking about Chapter 6, and the title is The Written Curriculum. So, when we are teaching young children at the very forefront, we should have very intentional goals in mind. That means, what do we want the children to learn, and how are we going to get them to learn it? This chapter 6, the written curriculum, is going to explore how to establish, write, and implement measurable goals and outcomes, how to plan strategies to use as resources, and how to introduce the daily learning plan, which is a tool designed to support your teaching and learning. And a daily learning plan is really kind of like a lesson plan. Okay. How are you going to go about doing what you know you need to do? Okay. So let's get started. When parents walk into the preschool classroom, they notice is the children and their activities. They notice the children playing store in the dramatic play area. They notice the children reading a book, possibly in the library area, or another one building a bridge in the block area. But what they don't see is all that extensive planning and intention that goes into the activities that you're having on a daily basis. So, in order to make every day meaningful for the children in your classroom, you must have very purposeful goals and make sure you set very purposeful goals and then activities that are built around or planned that will help the children meet those purposeful goals. The first step in creating quality learning goals is to know what the standards are for the year or the grade level that you are teaching. Think of the standards as building blocks to focus on so children learn what they need to in order to prepare for the next age level or the next grade. An early learning standard is an agreed upon list of skills that children need to develop a foundation for higher levels of learning. We have the ACELS document. We have Alabama Early Learning Guidelines. Lots of those things already in place within the state of Alabama and at your disposal. Early learning standards, we call standards and learning outcomes by a variety of names, such as developmental standards or early learning goals, which we just talked about what we have in the state of Alabama. Child development and learning goals in an educational setting are referred to as learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are statements that describe what the child will be able to do after participating in a certain learning experience. They are the end result. Okay, so learning outcomes are the end result and they must be measurable. And what this means is that the teacher will need to be able to use an assessment tool to determine if the child mastered that particular concept or not, to see what their proficiency of learning is. You are going to determine your learning outcomes based upon your knowledge of early learning standards. We're also going to, it's important, I think, when you are creating these learning outcomes to keep Bloom's taxonomy in mind. If you look on page 126 of your textbook, but also figure 6.3, you're going to see Bloom's taxonomy. It's like a pyramid, and it's a level of understanding, essentially. If you've been in CHD 100, we kind of already talked a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy and did an activity about it. But Bloom's taxonomy is basically a system to define and distinguish different levels of thinking, learning, and understanding. And you can see that if you're following along in your book. It was developed to provide a common language for educators to discuss and exchange ideas about learning and assessment methods. And one thing that Bloom's taxonomy, it's a great tool for you to keep because it's going to give you some very measurable verbs that you'll be able to use when writing your learning outcomes. So here are the 6 steps that we're going to follow when we are writing a measurable learning outcome. First, we're going to identify the state standard that's going to be the focus of our learning outcome. So we're going to get that here again from the ACELS document, from the Early Learning Guideline, Alabama Early Learning Guidelines, possibly from a purchased curriculum that you might have. Okay. Then number two, we're going to go back over to Bloom's taxonomy, and we're going to select the most appropriate action verb that we can use. Okay, you can get online and do an online search like a Google search, and you'll find a very extensive list of action verbs. Okay, and I'm going to give you an example in just a minute. So let's say that we want the children. We're going to identify our state standard as one-to-one correspondence, meaning they see one thing, they count, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So that's going to be our state standard. So I'm going to select an appropriate action verb that lets me know if they've mastered that. So I'm going to possibly say that the children will be able to not rote count, excuse me. The children will be able to count using one-to-one correspondence. Okay. So I'm always going to begin with a statement that describes the knowledge or the abilities to be demonstrated. And it's always going to start like, the children will be able to. Okay. Then I'm going to insert that verb that describes that measurable action. Here again, I'm going to go back to Bloom's where I can find that measurable verb. Do I want them to be able to remember it? Do I want them to be able to create, demonstrate, that kind of thing? And then I'm going to complete the statement with the knowledge or skill that I want them to learn, so that they are very specific to the outcome. So, how am I going to plan to do all of these things? There are many ways teachers can plan their day to meet their learning outcomes. But regardless of the method, the effective teacher always keeps in mind the desired learning outcome. So we have something that one way we can determine these learning outcomes is something called backward design. And that's just essentially starting with the end in mind. Okay, what is it that I want them to learn? And let me plan backwards. So I'm first going to decide what my desired outcome is. Then I'm going to decide my assessment strategies. And then I'm going to select my learning experiences that match all of that. Okay, I think backward design is a great way to go. What do I want them to learn? How am I going to assess them? And then what learning experiences can I attach to this in order to teach my desired outcome. Okay. With a focus on what children will learn rather than what the teacher will teach, backward design begins with the steps that are going to be kind of shown on your book in page 128 in figure 6.5, where you choose your standard, decide what the child will learn, assess, what are you going to use to assess it, and then plan your learning experiences. One thing we can do to help us do that is to use some planning tools and graphic organizers, and they can be used at the beginning, in the middle, the end of the planning process. Graphic organizers are very valuable tools that engage the children based on their interest and prior experiences, and going to provide the teacher with information to inform your teaching. So graphic organizers are a great tool to use in your classroom. A KWHL chart, if you're following along in your book, which I encourage you to be doing as we're going along, it's a widely used graphic organizer. It stands for what they already know, that's the K, what they want to know, the W, how can they find it out, the H, and then the L, what did they learn? So it's a way for you to determine and then assess, determine and assess as you're going back and forth. Concept webs, another great way. It's also, we might call them a concept map, a bubble map. You're going to see lots of those on page 130 and 131. At the very center is the main idea, and then you have all these supporting ideas that branch out from it. And in some of the examples in your text, you're going to see that they're using the concepts to make connections around water. It's going to kind of be their learning focus. And in one on page 130. Another popular graphic organizer is called a concept design diagram. Excuse me. This teacher created tool provides the teacher with many different pathways connected to learning and ideas to explore in the days and the weeks to come, while providing a snapshot of where the learning has come from and where it might be going. I love a Venn diagram. It's a simple way to show relationships between two things or between a set of items. You use a circle, it's kind of like a hula hoop. And so you have two outwards, and then there's an overlapping piece in the middle that shows what things have in common. You'll see an example of that one on page 132. Your book also suggests storyboards, and I think that's another great graphic organizer that you use pictures and sequential drawings that can tell a visual story. It's great to use by just taking pictures from the story, copying them, and then having the children put them in order for sequencing. Um, all of these types of things allow you to have, once again, that very intentional teaching. So let's talk about the daily learning plan. Like I told you, that's basically your lesson plan. And then catalytic events, okay? Written daily learning plans meet the expectation that each school and early childhood program offers its curriculum in written form, while also creating a curriculum that is built on the children's own shared interest. The daily learning plan is undoubtedly one of the most important documents that the teacher or the teaching team is going to create. Um, if you don't have a daily learning plan, I'm not really sure what you're doing. Um, if so, you're just kind of winging it. Okay. A lot of times you're going to have administrators, directors, they're going to come in and check these daily learning plans just so that they know that you're staying on task. Some early childhood programs are going to purchase curriculum, and that is just fine. Okay. Um, so you can buy published or purchased curricula as long as it is developmentally appropriate. And that means that teachers can adapt the learning experiences that are offered in that curriculum based on the children's interest. And if it's very rigid, narrowly defined, skill focused, highly teacher scripted, meaning the teacher says this and it's outlined, then it's probably not developmentally appropriate, okay? Because it would be very rigid, like we want you to do this regardless of the children's interest or regardless of the children's abilities. Uh-oh, sorry. Children's previous skills and interests are defined and used to create developmentally appropriate curriculum. We basically want to build on what the children already learned, their prior knowledge. So starting or launching your teaching from the children's prior knowledge is at the very foundation of very good teaching. To me, that is truly the definition of exceptional teaching. So, what are catalytic events? Your book calls them catalytic events. I had never ever heard of them call this before. I'd always call them a teachable moment. Okay. So, what are catalytic events? They are teachable moments. Okay. Um, and they're an experience or a material that sparks children's interest and motivates them to want to learn more. Throughout a child's day, there are many events that could become a catalyst for learning. They are sometimes spontaneous, meaning they just happen. And like I was leaving a school this week, and a spontaneous event, I'm pretty sure, was happening. And I looked over at the children out on the playground, and they were all over on the fence. So there was a lineman working on fixing, I think he was repairing a light pole, actually, or putting up a new light pole. And I would say over half of the children that were on the playground were all over on the fence. That is a spontaneous catalytic event. Okay. The teachers could have gone back inside their classroom, had a big discussion about it, probably had a discussion right there on the fence row about it. Gone in and gosh, you could have turned your dramatic play area into, a person who works on telephone poles or light fixtures, that kind of thing. Um, it was very, very cute to me just to see how many of those children were already out there watching it. Maybe a building is being built near your school. Garbage truck picking up the trash outside. Snow falling for the first time. We just had that in our area. First time many of these children have ever seen snow. So these are all examples of those catalytic events. And what you need to remember and recognize is that opportunities for learning begin with understanding that children learn about their world and their place in it through their interactions with materials and other people. Be sure to provide a variety of opportunities for children to play together, explore materials, and engage in meaningful conversations with adults. It is in these moments that teachable moments will emerge. So, how do we select our topic of interest and then our focus topic? A topic of interest is the main idea that results from that catalytic event, that teachable moment, and from which many smaller learning opportunities or focus topics are going to arise. The length of time that you're going to spend on a focus topic is going to be determined by the engagement of the children. How involved are they? Not dictated by the clock or the calendar, but how involved are the children? Um, and if I'm in a learning area and I see that the children are losing interest, I need to reevaluate. I need to reevaluate that learning experience when those children lose interest. After I identify my topics of interest, um, I'm going to develop the next level of planning, which is going to be identifying the focus topics around which the daily learning experiences will revolve. I can use a KWHL chart to inform my teaching and my learning. And here again, when children are not engaging in the learning area that are set up, it is time to reevaluate the experience. Deciding whether to modify the learning area that has lost children's interest or put it away depends on the dynamics of the children and what is available for the teacher to plan around. So that does it for chapter 6. I hope you learned about the written curriculum and kind of how to write measurable outcomes. And we're going to work on that a little bit in class as well. So I'll see you next week for CHD 204.